Plenty of teams, I'm sure, are content with their place at the draft. There are certainly others who need to go on the offense and trade up to make sure that they are in the best place to succeed.
I think the Steelers are going to be on the phone to get into the top 10.
The pressure gets amplified ahead of the draft when the stakes are higher and the prospects are unproven, which makes deciding whether or not to trade up in the draft a huge decision for a lot of front offices. So today, let's take a look at 10 teams that should throw caution to the wind and move up in the draft to go get their guy. The New Orleans Saints have one of the single best cases for moving up in the draft. The organization has been set into reset mode with the sudden retirement or step away from football or whatever you want to call Sean Payton leaving the team. If it wasn't bad enough that their franchise quarterback Drew Brees retired last year, now their coach, who has had his hands in nearly every facet of the operation in New Orleans since 2006, is now gone. New Orleans was able to find a degree of continuity by hiring Dennis Allen, who had been with the organization for 12 years, but the situation in the quarterback room is shaping up to be another big question mark, much like it was throughout the entire 2021 season. After striking out in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, the Saints decided to settle for another year of Jameis Winston. He was solid when healthy, but then Winston suffered that season-ending ACL injury. He should be ready for the start of the 2022 season, but injuries do remain a concern, as does the team's long-term stability at the game's most important position. So I think the Saints would be wise to try and package some of their draft picks to move up and get the top quarterback on their draft board. And if Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett isn't their cup of tea, it would still be wise to consider moving up to get one of these seemingly can't-miss O-line prospects to replace Terron Armstead. You can never go wrong with an elite blocker, especially after losing one of the best tackles in the game to free agency. Now, staying in the NFC South, the Carolina Panthers should really consider moving up in the draft this year, so that they can find a blue-chip player that they can build around. And you know what? I would not be shocked to see them do exactly that. There is an increasing sense that Matt Rule's job in Carolina is very much in jeopardy. So it shouldn't be a shocker to see him throw caution to the wind and try to get some difference makers in the building as soon as humanly possible. There's no real consensus on what Rule and his cohorts will actually do with the higher pick if and when they do move up. Many believe he's going to try and take a quarterback, particularly after enduring multiple failed reclamation projects, most recently with Sam Darnold, who, oh by the way, they did give up some valuable draft capital for last year. As it stands, the Panthers hold the 6th overall pick, and there are also some murmurs that they might try and trade up to number 2, so that they can nab former Alabama offensive tackle Evan Neal. Scouts have raved about Neal's combination of athleticism and size, and he could very well be a cornerstone type of guy. But either way, there are clearly a few reasons why the Panthers should at least consider moving up in the draft at this point. The Pittsburgh Steelers are another team that looked poised to try and trade up, and they definitely seem to be prioritizing another QB, now that Big Ben Roethlisberger has ever so gracefully stepped away from the game. And if you ask me, I think this is a good decision. Mason Rudolph has shown extremely little, and Dwayne Haskins is no longer in the building after his tragic passing. And unfortunately for the Steelers faithful, they're sitting at pick number 20, putting them in a tough spot to get one of the top guys unless they make a move up in the draft, which it now appears they definitely need to do. Now that Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson, both of which were rumored to be of interest to Pittsburgh, are off the market, it would be very wise to try and trade up to keep Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh and build around him. The Steelers have a talented and relatively young roster that should allow the youthful quarterback to hit the ground running. And considering their previous success of winning now with rookie quarterbacks like Big Ben back in the day, I think it's worth a shot. Now, let's take a sidestep to the Denver Broncos, who, unlike Pittsburgh, were actually able to land one of the highly sought-after veteran quarterbacks. In this case, the aforementioned Russell Wilson. While the suits in Denver surely were excited to land Wilson, regardless of how much draft capital that cost them, they now really need to consider packaging some of their picks to move up and get some players that can make a difference right away. After all, they are firmly in win-now mode, which means that the pressure is on. Fortunately for Denver, they were able to stockpile quite a few picks before dealing for Wilson. So while the Broncos don't have a first rounder, they do still have a second rounder, 2/3, and 2/4, which honestly should give them enough ammo to trade up and bring in at least 1 or 2 solid contributors. And considering they're in the insanely competitive AFC West, which is deep with talented offenses, Denver would be very wise to move up and try to get a stud edge rusher somewhere in the first round. Maybe snag a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau out of Oregon, who is extremely talented and rumored to be falling out of the top 10. Alright, turning across the country now to Washington, D.C., where the newly named Commanders, like the Broncos, have decided to forego the whole develop a quarterback plan, and instead brought in a veteran in Carson Wentz. Now, obviously, Wentz is a far cry from Russell Wilson in just about every way. But between him and incumbent QB Taylor Heineke on the roster, Washington is no longer in the market to move up and take a quarterback. Now, that being said, the decision to bring in a guy like Wentz also signals that they believe they have a roster that is ready to contend now. So don't be surprised if they decide to move up and fill another need on the roster. Perhaps maybe on the offensive line to protect their oft-injured quarterback acquisition. The unit as a whole struggled last year, and with Brandon Scherf, one of the team's more reliable linemen, now in Jacksonville, the need is only magnified. Maybe they package the 11th overall pick with some other draft assets to move up and take a stud offensive lineman, like the aforementioned Neal or Ika Mekwonu out of NC State. You never know what you're going to get with Carson Wentz, but if you can keep him upright, it's a good start. Staying in the NFC East, the Philadelphia Eagles are in a great position heading into this year's draft. They've done very well to stockpile draft picks over the past few seasons. And while they did already trade away one of their first rounders to the Saints in a blockbuster deal involving numerous picks, they still have another 2 first rounders and 10 total picks in this year's draft. Not to mention another 2 first rounders next year and 2 seconds in 2024, which leads many experts to wonder if they might package 2 or 3 of those picks, perhaps along with a player or 2, to move up into the top 10. The team does seem like it's still warming up to Jalen Hurts, and considering this year's QB draft class is not extremely deep, it seems likely that Hurts will have one more year to prove himself as the franchise quarterback. Philly really needs to solidify a defense that can complement the efficient run offense that Hurts led last year, so maybe a playmaking defensive lineman like Trayvon Walker would help. The Minnesota Vikings are another talented team that are seemingly stuck in QB purgatory with a decent but not great option under center. So it'll be interesting to see what their new head coach Kevin O'Connell and general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah want to do. They still have Kirk Cousins signed on for at least 2 more seasons, but that doesn't mean they can't move up and secure a guy who they believe they can mold into their franchise quarterback of the future. Or if they're content with Cousins and want to try to win now with him, why not move up and address the secondary by grabbing one of the top defensive backs between Ahmad Sauce Gardner and Kyle Hamilton? Either way, with all the new faces in town, I wouldn't be shocked to see Minnesota bring an aggressive approach to draft day to try and make a splash, especially with the NFC seemingly as wide open as it is right now. Now, the Baltimore Ravens are in a rather unique situation that is quite a bit different from a lot of the teams on this list. They desperately need to add some talent at the wide receiver position. Hollywood Brown has started to emerge as a key target for former league MVP Lamar Jackson, but they need to add another top wideout in the first round. I'd love to see them take a guy like Drake London out of USC, or even Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State. And if trading up to do so is a necessity, then they should absolutely pay the premium to ensure that the most important person in the organization, Lamar Jackson, has the right pieces around him to succeed. Unfortunately, Baltimore and its 14th overall pick may be competing with a divisional foe, the Cleveland Browns, and also in desperate need for some help at wide receiver, especially after the unceremonious dismissals of Odell Beckham Jr. last season and Jarvis Landry this offseason. That offense looked rough last year, and while many believe that it had to do with Baker's injury, I am definitely concerned about the passing game as a whole, even with Deshaun Watson now in town. Luckily, they do have one of the best offensive backfields that the league has seen in quite some time, which to me is all the more reason to move up and make sure that they can get a stud receiver to slot in alongside 2022 offseason acquisition Amari Cooper. And lastly, we have the Arizona Cardinals. Broncos, who absolutely need to get some more youth on the defensive side of the ball. They tried to fill their defensive holes via free agency and trades last year, bringing in veterans like J.J. Watt. But we saw how that played out, and now they no longer have Chandler Jones, which adds even more pressure on head coach Cliff Kingsbury and general manager Steve Keim, who were already under fire to begin with. So I wouldn't be shocked if they settled for whatever defensive target falls to them at 23. Arizona should be aggressive though and move up to the top 10 to get the guy that will actually help them solidify that defense for years to come. Either at linebacker with a guy like Devin Lloyd out of Utah, or off the edge with someone like Kayvon Thibodeau, who could be a big-time game changer for whichever team decides to take a chance on him. But what NFL team do you think should trade up in the draft? Did we miss anyone? Join us in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea, because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.